I fell for a man who solves problems with blackmail and billion-dollar deals. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The air inside the boardroom of Nicholas Holdings was not merely recycled. It was rarefied, scrubbed of all pollutants, and seemingly stripped of oxygen entirely. Madeline Platt stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city of London sprawling below like a circuit board of gray steel and rain-slicked pavement. She checked her reflection in the darkened glass for the third time. Her structured navy dress was impeccable, her dark red hair pulled back into a severe chignon that allowed no stray strands to betray her nerves. She was the best crisis strategist in the city. She fixed broken reputations. She spun disasters into minor inconveniences. Yet, standing here, waiting for Gareth Nicholas, she felt less like a professional and more like a defendant waiting for a verdict. The double doors at the far end of the room opened. They did not bang or creak. They simply parted to admit the man who owned the building and, if the rumors were true, half the politicians in Westminster. Gareth Nicholas was taller than he appeared in the financial journals. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision. He did not carry a tablet or a file. He walked with a predator's economy of motion, wasting no energy on unnecessary gestures. His face was a study in cold geometry, all sharp angles and a jawline that could cut glass, but it was his eyes that stopped Madeline's breath in her throat. They were steel gray, utterly devoid of warmth, analyzing her value and her potential threat level in a single sweep. He did not offer a hand. He merely gestured to the mahogany table that stretched between them like a tactical map. "Sit, Miss Platt. We have a great deal of work to do and very little time to do it." Madeline took her seat, placing her leather portfolio on the table. She prided herself on her voice, calm, authoritative, the voice of reason in a storm. She used it now. "Mr. Nicholas, I was briefed on the way over. Your acquisition of Vortex Systems has stalled due to allegations of insider trading leaking from your Paris office. You need me to control the narrative before the market opens tomorrow." Gareth remained standing. He walked to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of water, though he offered her neither. He took a sip, watching her over the rim of the crystal glass. "The allegations are false," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate through the wood of the table. "But the perception is damaging. I do not care about the market opening. I care about the board vote on Friday. I need you to bury the story, not spin it. Bury it." Madeline opened her portfolio, pulling out her preliminary strategy notes. To bury a story like this, we need a counter-narrative, a distraction. If the allegations are false, we release the internal audit records. We invite transparency. It is the only way to restore trust. Gareth placed the glass down with a soft clink. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, devoid of humor. "Transparency is a luxury for those who have nothing to lose, Miss Platt. We will not be releasing audit records. You will instead release a statement regarding the mental health instability of the accuser, the former CFO of the Paris branch. You will express our deep concern for his well-being and our commitment to supporting his recovery." Madeline paused, her pen hovering over her notebook. Her ethical boundaries were flexible. PR was rarely about the whole truth, but this was a direct character assassination. "Is he unstable?" she asked, meeting his gaze, "or is he just inconvenient?" The air in the room dropped another few degrees. Gareth moved closer, placing his hands on the back of the chair opposite her. He leaned in, and for the first time, Madeline saw the danger lurking beneath the bespoke tailoring. "He is a liability, and you are here to neutralize liabilities. My head of legal drafted the contract you signed in the lobby. I suggest you recall the clause regarding moral objections. You are paid to solve the problem, not to judge the methodology." Madeline swallowed hard. She needed this contract. Her own boutique firm was still recovering from the financial crater her ex-husband had left behind, and the retainer Nicholas Holdings offered was enough to secure her independence for 2 years. She nodded, keeping her face neutral. "Very well. If we are going with the compassion angle, I need his personnel file. I need to know what existing conditions we can plausibly reference without inviting a defamation lawsuit. You will find the files on the secure server. The access code is on the tablet in front of you. He turned his back to her, walking toward the window to take a call that buzzed on his encrypted phone. Madeline seized the moment. She tapped the code into the tablet embedded in the table surface. The interface was sleek, dark mode, minimalist. She navigated to the personnel folders, finding the former CFO's name. As she scrolled, her finger slipped, swiping left instead of down. The screen shifted to a root directory she clearly was not meant to see. The folder was labeled simply, Leverage. Curiosity, her fatal flaw, flared. She tapped it. The screen filled with subfolders, each named after prominent business rivals, senators, and even a few regulatory officials. She saw the name of the Vortex Systems CEO. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. There were no financial spreadsheets here. There were photos. Grainy, high-contrast surveillance photos of the Vortex CEO meeting with men who looked like they belonged on a wanted list. There were transcripts of phone calls. There was a scanned document that looked like a confession to money laundering, signed and dated. Gareth Nicholas wasn't buying Vortex Systems. He was extorting it. He was forcing the sale by holding a blade to the CEO's throat. Madeline's blood ran cold. This wasn't crisis management. This was criminal conspiracy. She frantically tapped the back button, trying to return to the personnel files, but the tablet lagged for a fraction of a second, just long enough for a shadow to fall over her. She looked up. Gareth was standing right beside her. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the screen. He didn't shout. He didn't grab the device. He simply reached out and tapped the power button, fading the screen to black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. "I asked you to look at the personnel file," Gareth said softly. Madeline pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her portfolio. "I think I've made a mistake, Mr. Nicholas. I don't think I'm the right fit for this organization." She turned to leave, her heels clicking rapidly on the polished floor. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. It wasn't a command, but a statement of fact that froze her hand on the door handle. "If you walk out that door, Madeline, the retainer is void. The non-disclosure agreement, however, remains in effect in perpetuity, and given what you just saw, I would have to enforce it with extreme prejudice." Madeline turned slowly. Gareth hadn't moved. He was watching her with that same calm, terrifying detachment. "Are you threatening me?" she whispered. "I am negotiating," he corrected, walking slowly around the table until he stood directly in front of her. He was close enough now that she could smell his scent, sandalwood, rain, and something metallic. "You are in debt, Madeline. Your firm is leveraged to the hilt because your ex-husband has a gambling problem he forgot to mention before the divorce. You need this job." Madeline stiffened. "How do you know that?" "I know everything. That is my business." He looked down at her, his expression softening imperceptibly, shifting from threat to solicitation. "You are excellent at what you do. I need that excellence. I do not need a conscience. I need a strategist. Stay. Fix this mess with the Paris CFO, earn your fee, and forget what you saw on the tablet." He extended a hand, not to shake, but to brush a stray lock of hair from her temple. His touch was electric, shocking in its intimacy and its coldness. "Do we have a deal, Miss Platt?" Madeline looked at the door, then back at the man who held her future in his hands. She saw the darkness in him, a deep, well-structured abyss of moral ambiguity, but she also saw the power. And God help her, she was tired of being powerless. She took a breath, steeling herself against the warning bells ringing in her mind. "The compassion angle won't work," she said, her voice steadying. "It looks defensive. We leak a rumor that he was selling data to a competitor. It justifies the firing and discredits his allegations simultaneously." Gareth smiled then, a true smile that didn't reach his eyes, but transformed his face into something devastatingly handsome. "Excellent," he said. "Welcome to the team, Madeline." He walked past her to open the door, holding it for her. As she passed him, he leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "And Madeline, don't lie to me again. I prefer my partners to be honest about their sins." She walked out into the corridor, her heart racing not with fear, but with a terrifying exhilaration. She had walked into the lion's den, and instead of running, she had just agreed to help him hunt. Part 2. 2 weeks later, Madeline found herself sitting in the plush cream-colored leather seat of a Gulfstream G650, watching the English Channel disappear beneath a blanket of clouds. She had successfully navigated the PR storm of the Vortek acquisition, spinning a web of corporate intrigue so dense that no journalist could find the truth at the center of it. The stock price had not only stabilized, it had climbed. Gareth sat across from her, a crystal tumbler of scotch resting on the burl wood table between them. He had been working on his laptop for the first hour of the flight, ignoring her completely. Now, he closed the lid and studied her. "You are tense," he observed. Madeline adjusted her silk scarf. She was tense. Since the day in the boardroom, she had felt a constant low-level hum of anxiety. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to ask her to do something truly illegal, or for the police to kick down her door. "I'm not used to private aviation," she lied. "It feels excessive." "It is efficient," he countered. "We have a dinner in Zurich at 8, a breakfast meeting in Milan tomorrow. Commercial travel would cost me hours I cannot afford to lose." He took a sip of his drink. "You did well with the Vortek fallout. The board is pleased." "And the Paris CFO?" Madeline asked, her voice quiet. The man whose career she had effectively incinerated based on a lie. "He has been compensated," Gareth said indifferently. "He accepted a generous severance package in exchange for a retraction. He is currently looking for property in the south of Spain. He is fine, Madeline, better than fine." Madeline looked at him, searching for the lie, but found none. It was the first crack in her perception of him. He was ruthless, yes, but he wasn't cruel without purpose. He balanced the scales, even if he used his own weights to do it. "Why are we going to Zurich?" she asked, changing the subject. "There is a man there, Julian Thorne. He owns a shipping conglomerate that I require for the next phase of expansion. He is resistant to standard negotiations." "And you want me to spin the story when he suddenly changes his mind?" Gareth's eyes darkened. "I want you to observe. You are part of my inner circle now. You need to understand how the world actually works, not how you wish it worked." They landed in Zurich under a heavy gray sky. A black sedan was waiting on the tarmac, whisking them away to the Dolder Grand Hotel. Madeline had stayed in luxury hotels before, but this was a different tier of existence. The suite Gareth had booked was larger than her entire apartment, with a panoramic view of the lake and the Alps. There was only one suite. Madeline stood in the center of the palatial living room, her suitcase handle gripped tight in her hand. "There are 2 bedrooms," Gareth said, walking past her to the bar. "I do not presume, Madeline, though I admit the thought is not unappealing." She felt a flush rise to her cheeks. He was flirting with her. It was subtle, dry, and dangerous. "I'll unpack," she said stiffly, retreating to the 2nd bedroom. Dinner was in a private dining room at the hotel's restaurant. Julian Thorne was a loud, boisterous man with a red face and a suit that cost more than a car but fit poorly. He drank too much wine and leered at Madeline openly. "Beautiful assistant you have," Nicholas Thorne slurred, waving a fork. "Does she do more than take notes?" Madeline stiffened, her grip on her silverware tightening. Gareth didn't move. He didn't even look up from his plate. He simply cut a piece of steak with surgical precision. "She is not an assistant, Julian. She is a partner. And she is currently the only reason you are not being eviscerated in the press for the labor violations on your Pacific fleet." Thorne froze, the color drained from his face. "What?" Gareth looked up then. His eyes were flat, dead things. "We know about the conditions on the freighter in Manila. We know about the bribes paid to the port authority. Madeline here has drafted a press release detailing every infraction. It is ready to go out to the wire services at midnight." He took a sip of wine. "Unless, of course, we come to an agreement on the shipping rates." Thorne looked at Madeline. She kept her face impassive, masking the shock. She hadn't drafted anything. Gareth was bluffing. Or worse, he had drafted it himself and put her name on it. Thorne slammed his napkin down. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Gareth said softly. The rest of the dinner was a blur of capitulation. Thorne signed the preliminary agreement before dessert was served. When he left, stumbling slightly, he looked like a broken man. Gareth signaled for the check. "You used me," Madeline said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "You put my name on a threat I didn't write." I utilized your reputation, Gareth corrected. Thorne knows you are ethical. If the threat came from me, he would think it was a bluff. Coming from you, he believed it was a moral crusade. It made the threat real. He stood up, offering her his hand. Come, let's get a drink in the bar. You look like you need one. The bar was dark, lit by candles and the glow of the city outside. They sat in a secluded booth. Madeline drank a martini quickly, needing the burn of the alcohol to settle her nerves. Does it ever bother you, she asked, looking at him, the manipulation, the blackmail? Everyone is selling something, Madeline. I just ensure I'm the one buying at the lowest price. He leaned back, his arm resting on the back of the booth behind her, not touching but encompassing her space. You think you are different. You think because you use press releases instead of dossiers that your hands are clean. But we are the same. We both shape reality to suit our needs. I don't destroy people, she whispered. No, you just make them disappear. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. His skin was warm, his touch gentle in a way that terrified her more than his anger. You are beautiful when you are righteous, Madeline. It's a pity it's such a waste of energy. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. The air between them crackled with a tension that had been building since London. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a magnetic, inevitable pull. You're a monster, she said, but she didn't pull away. I know, Gareth replied, his thumb brushing her lower lip. But I am the monster who is on your side. And in this world, that is the only thing that matters. He leaned in, closing the distance. Madeline knew she should run. She knew she should slap him and storm out. But the darkness in him called to the broken parts of her, the parts that were tired of fighting alone. When his lips brushed hers, tentative at first, then possessing, she didn't push him away. She opened to him, sealing a pact that she knew, with absolute certainty, would either save her or destroy her completely. The rain in London was different from the rain in Zurich. In Switzerland, the weather had felt crisp, cleansing, a backdrop to the sharp clarity of the decisions made in high-altitude boardrooms. Here, the rain was a relentless, suffocating gray sheet that turned the city into a blurred watercolor of charcoal and neon. It had been 3 weeks since they returned, 3 weeks since the line had been crossed in the darkened bar of the Dolder Grand, and the atmosphere inside the penthouse office of Nicholas Holdings had shifted irrevocably. Madeline Platt sat at her desk, the glass surface cool beneath her fingertips, staring at a press release that refused to be written. Ostensibly, nothing had changed. She was still the consultant on retainer, billing her hours, managing the optics of a corporation that moved through the global economy like a shark through deep water. But everything had changed. The air between her and Gareth Nicholas was no longer just professional tension, it was a loaded weapon. Every glance exchanged across the mahogany conference table, every accidental brush of hands as files were transferred, carried the weight of what had happened in Zurich and what continued to happen in the quiet, stolen hours of the night at his Kensington townhouse. She was falling. It was a terrifying, vertigo-inducing descent into a world where morality was fluid and power was the only currency that held value. She told herself she was gathering intelligence, learning the beast so she could eventually tame it or escape it, but it was a lie she was finding harder to believe. She liked the way he looked at her. She liked the heavy, possessive weight of his protection. Her internal reverie was shattered by the buzzing of her personal cell phone. She glanced at the screen, and the blood drained from her face so rapidly she felt lightheaded. Liam. The name alone was enough to summon a phantom ache in her chest, a residue of 3 years of marriage that had eroded her credit score, her self-esteem, and her faith in people. Liam, the investigative journalist who investigated nothing but the bottom of a bottle and the losing side of sports bets. Liam, who had vanished 6 months ago after draining their joint savings account, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a fractured reputation. She silenced the call. He rang again immediately. Madeline stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She grabbed her phone and walked quickly out of the open-plan workspace, heading for the privacy of the stairwell. The concrete echo of the stairwell was cold, amplifying the tremor in her voice as she answered. "What do you want, Liam?" The voice on the other end was slurred, laced with that familiar, grating mix of arrogance and desperation. "Is that any way to greet your husband, Maddie? Or ex-husband, I suppose, though the papers haven't come through yet, have they? I hear you're doing well. Moved up in the world. Nicholas Holdings. That's big league stuff. How did you find me? Madeline demanded, her hand gripping the railing so hard her knuckles turned white. I'm a journalist, remember? I have sources, and I have eyes. I saw the photos from Zurich, you and Gareth Nicholas looking very cozy. The implication hung in the silence, slimy and suffocating. Madeline closed her eyes, fighting down the nausea. If you're calling for money, Liam, the answer is no. You took everything. There is nothing left. There's always something left, Maddie. Liam laughed, a wet, ugly sound. Especially now. You see, I've been doing some digging. Nicholas is a dangerous man. Rumors of blackmail, extortion, shadow banking. And now, my sweet, ethical wife is his mouthpiece. Imagine what the tabloids would pay for a story about the crisis queen sleeping her way into the bed of a corporate warlord. Imagine what it would do to your shiny new career. It was a shakedown, crude, simple, and effective. How much? She whispered, hatting herself for asking. £50,000, cash by Friday, or I start making calls. I have a draft written already. The devil's mistress. Catchy, don't you think? I don't have £50,000, Liam. You know that. Ask your boyfriend. I'm sure he has that in his couch cushions. The line went dead. Madeline stood in the cold stairwell, the silence ringing in her ears. She leaned her forehead against the rough concrete wall, breathing shallow, ragged breaths. She couldn't tell Gareth. That was her first, instinctive thought. If Gareth knew, he would handle it, but the thought of his handling terrified her. Moreover, it would cement her position as a liability. She was supposed to be the fixer, the one who made problems disappear, not the one who brought a chaotic, drunken loose end to his doorstep. She went back to her desk, her mind racing. She had some jewelry she could sell. She could take out a high-interest loan. She could leverage the retainer advance. She began to type frantically, pulling up her banking details, calculating, strategizing, trying to find a way to bleed herself dry one last time to keep the ghosts at bay. She didn't hear the door to the inner office open. She didn't sense him standing there until his shadow fell across her desk, swallowing the light. Madeline. She jumped, minimizing the browser window with a clumsy jerk of her hand. Gareth was standing in the doorway, impeccably dressed in navy wool, his face an unreadable mask of calm authority. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing, the tremor in her hands, the sheen of sweat on her brow, the defensive posture of her shoulders. "Come in," he said. It wasn't a request. Madeline stood on shaky legs and followed him into the sanctum of his office. The room was soundproofed, hermetically sealed against the chaos of the world. He waited until the door clicked shut before turning to face her. Who was on the phone? Madeline blinked, taken aback. It was personal. "Everything that affects your focus is my business," Gareth said, his voice dropping an octave. "You have been staring at a blank document for 2 hours. You took a call in the stairwell. You returned looking like someone had held a gun to your head. Who was it?" Madeline sank into one of the leather guest chairs, her defiance crumbling under the weight of his scrutiny. She couldn't lie to him. He would find out anyway. "It was Liam, my ex-husband." Gareth's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He moved around his desk, not sitting, but leaning against the edge of it, crossing his arms over his chest. "And what did Liam want?" "Money. He knows I'm working for you. He knows we went to Zurich. He threatened to go to the press with a story about us unless I pay him £50,000 by Friday." She waited for the anger. She waited for him to yell at her for being careless, for bringing this sordid domestic drama into his pristine empire. But Gareth simply looked at her, his head tilting slightly to the side, like a scientist observing a curious specimen. "And you were checking your bank accounts to see if you could pay him," he stated. "I can handle it," Madeline said quickly, sitting up straighter. "I just need a little time to liquidate some assets. I won't let him damage the firm's reputation. I can control him." "Control him?" Gareth repeated, the words rolling off his tongue with a dark, amused disbelief. "Madeline, you cannot control a parasite by feeding it. You only make it stronger. If you pay him today, he will be back next month asking for double. That is the nature of blackmail. I should know." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. Does he have any actual evidence, or just the ramblings of a bitter man? He has nothing concrete, Madeline admitted. but in my industry, the accusation is often as damaging as the verdict. If he writes the story, even if we sue him later, the mud sticks. It would compromise my ability to shield you." Gareth turned back to her. His face was hard, the lines of his jaw set in stone. "You are not paying him a penny." "I have to, Gareth, if I don't." "If you don't, nothing will happen, because Liam does not exist." Madeline frowned, confusion knitting her brow. "What do you mean?" Gareth walked over to the secure phone on his desk. He picked up the receiver and dialed a single digit. "It's Nicholas," he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Madeline's face. "The subject is Liam Platt, investigative journalist currently unemployed. I want the full erasure protocol. Financial, digital, social. Initiate immediately. Yes, make him a ghost." He hung up the phone with a gentle click. "What did you just do?" Madeline whispered, horror and fascination warring in her chest. "I solved the problem," Gareth said calmly. "As of 5 minutes from now, Liam's bank accounts will be frozen for suspicious activity linked to terror financing. His passport will be flagged as stolen. His landlord will receive a notification of lease violation. His email accounts, his cloud storage, his digital drafts, all of it is being wiped or corrupted as we speak. By this evening, he won't be able to buy a pint of milk, let alone sell a story to a tabloid. He will be too busy trying to prove he is who he says he is to threaten anyone." Madeline stared at him, her mouth slightly open. It was efficient, it was bloodless, it was utterly terrifying. "You can't just delete a person, Gareth. That's insane, it's illegal." "It is necessary," he countered, moving toward her. He crouched down in front of her chair, bringing his face level with hers. He took her cold hands in his warm ones, his grip firm and grounding. "Listen to me, Madeline. Men like Liam rely on the decency of their victims. He counts on your fear, your shame, and your adherence to the rules. He thinks he is playing a game where he holds the cards because he has nothing to lose. But he forgot that he is playing against the house, and the house always wins." "But the cruelty," Madeline murmured, looking into his steel-gray eyes. "You destroyed his life without blinking." "He tried to hurt you," Gareth said, and the intensity in his voice stole the breath from her lungs. "He threatened what is mine. I do not tolerate threats." He stood up, pulling her with him until she was standing, pressed against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her securely, creating a fortress of wool and muscle against the world. "Come with me," he said softly. He led her not to the door, but to a concealed panel in the wainscoting that popped open to reveal a private elevator. They rode it down in silence, bypassing the lobby and descending into the subterranean garage. He guided her into the back of his armored Mercedes, the heavy door thudding shut with the finality of a bank vault. "Where are we going?" she asked as the driver pulled out into the rainy London streets. "Somewhere I have never taken anyone," Gareth replied, looking straight ahead. They drove for an hour, leaving the city center and winding into the older, industrial outskirts where the skeletons of Victorian factories loomed against the gray sky. The car stopped in front of a derelict textile mill, its windows broken, its brickwork crumbling. It looked abandoned, a relic of a forgotten era. Gareth opened the door and stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. Madeline followed him, her heels sinking into the wet gravel. He stood before the rusted gates, looking up at the faded sign that read Nicholas and Sons Textiles. "My father's factory," Gareth said, his voice devoid of sentimentality but heavy with history. "I didn't know your father was in manufacturing," Madeline said quietly, sensing that she was walking on hallowed, dangerous ground. "He was a good man," Gareth said, "honest. He paid his workers above the union rate. He refused to cut corners on safety. He believed that if you produced a quality product and treated people with dignity, the market would reward you." He turned to look at her, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "He was wrong. When I was 12, a conglomerate targeted him. They didn't want the factory, they wanted the land for a distribution hub. They undercut his prices. They bribed the inspectors to find violations that didn't exist. They spread rumors that his dyes were toxic. My father tried to fight them legally. He hired lawyers, he went to the press, he played by the rules." Gareth's jaw tightened. It took them 6 months to bankrupt him. He lost the factory, our home, his pension. He died of a heart attack a year later, broken and ashamed, in a rented flat that smelled of mildew. The men who destroyed him, they got bonuses. They were celebrated in the Financial Times for their aggressive expansion strategies. The wind howled through the broken windows of the mill, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the ghost story Gareth was telling. Madeline reached out, taking his wet hand in hers. "Gareth." "I learned a lesson that day, Madeline." Gareth squeezed her hand, his grip almost painful. "I learned that the law is not a shield. It is a weapon that the strong use to bludgeon the weak. I promised myself I would never be weak again. I promised I would never let anyone I care about be destroyed by people who think the rules will protect them." He pulled her closer, his eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying vulnerability. "That is why I do what I do. I collect secrets. I hoard leverage. I buy silence. Because when the wolves come to the door, and they always come, Madeline, you cannot fight them with good intentions. You have to be the bigger wolf." Madeline looked at the crumbling factory, then back at the man who had built an empire from the ashes of his father's failure. She understood him then, in a way that terrified her. His ruthlessness wasn't born of greed, it was born of trauma. It was a suit of armor welded onto his soul to keep the world from hurting him again. "And what about Liam?" she asked softly. "Is he a wolf?" "He is a jackal," Gareth sneered. "A scavenger, but he made the mistake of trying to bite. I didn't kill him, Madeline, I just took his teeth." He cupped her face in his wet hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I will not apologize for protecting you. I will not apologize for being what I am, but I need you to know why. Because if you are going to stay with me, if you are going to be part of this life, you need to understand that my morality does not come from a book. It comes from survival." Madeline looked into his eyes, seeing the boy who had watched his father break, and the man who had sworn to burn the world down rather than let it happen again. Her ethical training, her crisis management handbooks, her belief in the proper channels, it all felt flimsy and naive in the face of his raw, bleeding truth. She had come to him to fix his image. Instead, he was reshaping her reality. She reached up, her fingers threading into his damp hair, pulling his face down to hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Gareth," she whispered against his lips. It was a surrender. It was an acceptance. She was no longer just the strategist hired to spin the story. She was an accomplice. And as he kissed her there in the rain, in the shadow of his father's ruin, she realized that she felt safer with the monster than she had ever felt with the saints. The debt to her past was paid, erased by a man who had claimed her future as his own. But even as she melted into him, a cold dread settled in her stomach. Because she knew, with the instinct of a woman who lived by anticipating disasters, that protection like this always, eventually, demanded a price. The peace that settled over the penthouse in the weeks following the incident with Liam was deceptive. It was the heavy, static silence of a barometer dropping before a hurricane. To the outside world, Madeline Platt was still the brilliant crisis strategist orchestrating the public image of Nicholas Holdings, guiding the conglomerate through a quarter of record-breaking profits. Inside the glass walls of the Kensington townhouse, however, she had become something else entirely. She was the anchor for a man who lived his life, untethered from the rest of humanity. They had fallen into a rhythm that was as domestic as it was dangerous. Mornings were spent in the quiet intimacy of breakfast over encrypted briefing tablets. Evenings were a blur of high-stakes galas where she played the perfect corporate partner, her hand resting possessively on the arm of the most feared man in London. But beneath the silk sheets and the shared espressos, Madeline felt the walls closing in. She had accepted Gareth's world, the surveillance, the leverage, the erased enemies, but she had not yet paid the tax on it. She knew, with the fatalism of someone who had spent her life managing disasters, that the bill always came due. It arrived on a Tuesday, carried on a plume of black smoke rising from the East London docklands. Madeline was in her office, reviewing a press release for a charity initiative Gareth was launching, a calculated move to soften his image before a regulatory hearing, when the floor beneath her feet shuddered. It was subtle, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the pens in her crystal cup. A moment later, the sirens began. Gareth burst out of his office. The calm, icy detachment that was his trademark had fractured. His face was pale, his eyes burning with a chaotic fury she had never seen before. He didn't look at her. He looked at his head of security, a massive former SAS operative named Kale. "Report," Gareth barked, striding toward the bank of monitors on the wall. "Warehouse 4, Kale said, his voice grim. "Detonation. High-grade explosives. It took out the shipment of semiconductors from Taiwan and half the structural support for the adjacent pier. No casualties confirmed yet, but the night shift was skeleton crew." Gareth slammed his hand onto the conference table, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. This was not a business maneuver. This was an act of war. "Who?" Gareth demanded. "We have a claim of responsibility via an encrypted channel," Kale replied, tapping a keyboard to bring up a text display. "It's Volkov." The name sucked the oxygen out of the room. Madeline stood up slowly, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. She knew the name. Nikolai Volkov. He was a Russian oligarch with interests in energy and arms, a man who operated with a brutality that made Gareth's blackmail look like diplomacy. He was the one man Gareth had warned her about, the one rival who refused to play by the rules of leverage because he simply killed anyone who held a file on him. Gareth turned slowly to face her. The rage in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying, hollow resolve. "Get the car," he ordered Kale. "Initiate Protocol 0. He walked over to Madeline. He didn't touch her. He stood 3 feet away, as if his proximity might contaminate her with the violence that was radiating off him. "You need to leave," he said. Madeline blinked, the shock of the explosion giving way to confusion. "Leave, for the day." "For good, Madeline. You are going to the safe house in Surrey. From there, a helicopter will take you to a private airfield. I have a plane fueled and filed for a flight plan to New Zealand. There is an account there in your name with enough capital to start over. Kale will escort you." He turned away, reaching for his jacket, dismissing her as if she were an employee he was laying off. Madeline moved before she thought. She grabbed his arm, spinning him back around. "Excuse me, you're firing me, because a warehouse blew up." "I am not firing you," he hissed, shaking her hand off. "I am saving you. Volkov isn't sending a message about semiconductors. He is clearing the board. He knows I have the dossiers on his erratic trading in the Balkans. He knows I can freeze his assets. He doesn't care. He is escalating to kinetics." He stepped closer, looming over her, using his size to intimidate her into submission. "He bombs buildings, Madeline. Next he will bomb cars. Then homes, he will look for weak points. And you," he let out a harsh, frustrated breath, "you are the only weak point I have." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and bleeding. He wasn't sending her away because she was a liability. He was sending her away because he loved her, and that love had made him vulnerable for the first time in his life. Madeline felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of the steely resolve that had made her the best crisis manager in the city. "I'm not going to New Zealand, Gareth." "You have no choice." "I have every choice," she shouted, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "You brought me into this world. You made me an accomplice. You erased my ex-husband. You slept in my bed. You don't get to pack me up in a crate and ship me off to the other side of the world just because things got difficult." "This isn't difficult," Gareth roared back, losing control. "This is lethal. Volkov is not a corporate rival. He is a butcher. If he takes you, he won't just kill you. He will use you to break me. He will peel you apart piece by piece until I give him everything, and then he will kill us both anyway. I cannot fight him if I am terrified for you." "Then don't be terrified," Madeline said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Be smart. You told me once that you win because you are the bigger wolf. Running away isn't what wolves do." Gareth stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked torn between kissing her and dragging her to the car himself. "You don't understand what he is capable of." "Then tell me," she challenged. "Stop protecting me and start trusting me. I am a strategist, Gareth. You have files on Volkov. Use them." "I can't," he said, packing away from her, running a hand through his hair. "The media won't touch him. They are too afraid of libel laws and his hit squads. The regulators are paid off. The only way to stop him is to release the data directly to the intelligence agencies, but that implicates me in illegal surveillance. It destroys Nicholas Holdings. It puts me in prison." "So you're protecting the empire," she said quietly. "I am protecting the power that keeps us safe." The elevator dinged. Cale stepped out, looking anxious. "Boss, we have a problem." Gareth spun around. "What?" "Perimeter breach. We have 3 SUVs pulling up to the service entrance. No plates, heavily armed. They aren't waiting for an invite." Gareth cursed, a foul, guttural sound. He grabbed Madeline's hand, pulling her toward the private elevator hidden in the wall, the same one they had used the night he showed her the factory. "Too late for Surrey," he muttered. "We go to the panic room." He dragged her into the narrow elevator, punching a code into the panel. The doors slid shut just as the sound of shattering glass echoed from the lobby downstairs. The panic room was not a room. It was a bunker buried 3 floors beneath the foundation of the building. It was lined with reinforced steel, stocked with provisions, and filled with banks of monitors showing every angle of the building above. Gareth paced the small space like a caged tiger. On the screens, they watched as a team of men in tactical gear moved through the lobby, neutralizing the security guards with professional efficiency. They were hunting. "They are coming for the servers," Gareth said, watching the screen. "And for me." Madeline sat on the cot, watching him. He was checking a handgun, a sleek, matte black pistol that looked alien in his manicured hands. "Gareth," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "if they find us." "They won't get through the door," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Cale has a response team 5 minutes out." 5 minutes is a long time," she said. He stopped packing and looked at her. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound sorrow. He walked over and knelt before her, placing the gun on the floor so he could hold her hands. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I promised you protection. I promised you a life of elevated order. I brought you a war instead." Madeline looked at him, the sharp angles of his face, the gray eyes that had seen too much darkness. She realized then that she didn't want safety. She didn't want New Zealand. She wanted him. She wanted the man who had avenged his father, the man who had saved her from Liam, the man who stood alone against the world. "We fix this," she said firmly. "How?" he asked, shaking his head. "Volkov wants the files, right? He wants to destroy the leverage you have." "Yes." "Then give it to him." Gareth looked at her as if she were insane. "Surrender, that is your strategy." "Not surrender," she said, her mind racing, connecting dots that his rage had blinded him to. "A Trojan horse. You said the intelligence agencies won't touch the files because the source is illegal. But what if the source isn't you? What if the source is a leak?" She stood up, packing the small room now, her energy building. "Volkov is here to destroy the servers. Let him. But before he does, we upload the entire Volkov dossier to a public dead drop server. We encrypt it with a key that we send anonymously to every major news outlet and intelligence agency in Europe. We frame it as a hack. A whistleblower inside Volkov's own organization." Gareth frowned, processing the idea. "If I release the data, I lose my leverage. I have nothing to hold over him." "If you don't release it, he kills us," Madeline countered. "You're holding onto a grenade, Gareth. Throw it." "It destroys his privacy," Gareth mused. "It triggers a multinational investigation. He will be too busy fighting indictments to hunt us." "Exactly," Madeline said. "You lose the leverage, but you gain your life. You have to choose, Gareth. Do you want to be the king of the ashes, or do you want a future?" On the monitor, the men had reached the executive floor. They were planting charges on the server room door. Gareth looked at the screen, then back at Madeline. He saw the fire in her eyes, the refusal to be a victim. She was right. He had spent his life hoarding secrets because he thought they were shields, but some secrets were just weights, dragging him down into the dark. He stood up and went to the main console. He began typing furiously. "I can route the upload through a proxy chain in Estonia," he said, his fingers flying across the keys. "It will look like it came from inside his Moscow headquarters." "Do it," Madeline urged, standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. He hit the final key. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Uploading, 12%. On the security feed, the door to the server room blew open. The tactical team swarmed in, raising their weapons to shoot the physical drives. Gareth watched the screen, 45%. "They are destroying the hardware," he said grimly. "If they destroy the local drive before the upload finishes." "We need to stall them," Madeline said. "How? We are in a bunker." You have audio, don't you? Madeline pointed to the microphone on the console. You can speak to the room. Gareth nodded. Let me talk to them, she said. No, Gareth said immediately. Gareth, she grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. They are mercenaries. They are paid to do a job. Confusion is delay. Delay is time. Trust me. Gareth hesitated, looking at the progress bar. 68%. The men on the screen were raising sledgehammers to the main server racks. He toggled the switch. Madeline leaned into the microphone. Her voice, amplified through the speakers in the office above, was calm, authoritative, the voice of the crisis strategist. Gentlemen, this is Madeline Platt. I suggest you pause. On the screen, the men froze. The leader looked around, confused. The drives you are attempting to destroy are decoys, Madeline lied smoothly. The actual data is currently being live-streamed to a cloud server monitored by Interpol. Every strike you make on that hardware triggers a packet release. You are literally hammering your employer's death warrant. The leader signaled for his men to stop. He tapped his earpiece, likely checking with Volkov. If you leave now, Madeline continued, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs, we can pause the upload. You can tell Mr. Volkov you destroyed the local copies. He pays you. You leave. Everyone wins. If you continue, the data goes public in 10 seconds, and Volkov doesn't pay men who fail. It was a bluff, a beautiful, desperate lie. The leader hesitated. He looked at the servers, then at his men. 89%. The leader raised his rifle again. He wasn't buying it. Or Volkov was screaming in his ear to finish the job regardless. He is going to shoot, Gareth said, his hand hovering over the panic button that would vent halon gas into the server room. A last resort that would destroy the equipment but also kill the men, crossing a line from defense to murder. Don't, Madeline whispered. Wait. The leader fired. The first server rack sparked and smoked. 94%. Another shot, another rack destroyed. 98%. Gareth's finger trembled over the halon button. If the upload failed, they were dead. If he killed these men, he was the monster Madeline feared. Upload complete. The green text flashed on the screen. Gareth slumped against the console. He didn't press the button. Above, the men finished destroying the room, unaware that the ghost had already escaped the machine. They retreated, leaving a wreckage of twisted metal and silicon behind them. They sat in the silence of the bunker, the adrenaline crashing out of them. Gareth turned to Madeline. He looked exhausted, stripped of his armor, but alive. You did it, he said, awe in his voice. You lied to a hit squad and bought us 20 seconds. I told you, she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. I'm good at my job. Gareth wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her neck. The files are out, he murmured. By morning, Volkov will be the most wanted man in Europe. The war is over. But Madeline knew it wasn't that simple. She pulled back to look at him. The war with Volkov is over, she said, but you just gave up your biggest weapon. Nicholas Holdings is vulnerable. I don't care, Gareth said, and for the first time she believed him. I can rebuild the business. I can find new leverage, but I could not have rebuilt you. He kissed her then, a desperate, searing kiss that tasted of fear and salvation. But as they held each other in the subterranean dark, Madeline felt the weight of the price they had paid. Gareth had chosen her over his power. Now she would have to live with the knowledge that she was the reason he was defenseless. The promise had been kept, but the reckoning was still to come. Volkov might be finished, but the vacuum of power he left behind, and the weakness Gareth had exposed, would draw new predators. And next time, they wouldn't have a dossier to save them. Gareth pulled away, his face hardening again as the strategist took over from the lover. We need to leave, he said. The police will be here in minutes. We need to control the narrative before the press sees the smoke. Madeline nodded, standing up and smoothing her skirt. She was ready. What's the story? She asked. Gareth opened the heavy steel door of the panic room. The story is that Nicholas Holdings was the victim of a cyber-terrorist attack, he said, offering her his hand. And that we are cooperating fully with the authorities to bring a criminal to justice. We are the heroes, Madeline. She took his hand. It was a lie, of course. They weren't heroes. They were survivors. But as she stepped out of the bunker and began the climb back up to the shattered world above, Madeline decided that was a distinction she could live with. She was no longer just the woman who cleaned up the mess. She was the woman who helped make it. And God help anyone who tried to hurt what was hers. The aftermath of the Volkov leak was not a singular explosion, but a cascading series of detonations that rippled through the geopolitical landscape of Europe. In the 48 hours following the upload from the panic room, the news cycle had been dominated by the Nicholas leaks. A trove of documents so damning that 3 governments had already launched emergency inquiries, and Nikolai Volkov's assets had been frozen across the continent. To the public, it was a victory for transparency, a brave act of corporate whistleblowing that had exposed a tyrant. To the people who actually ran the world, however, it was a signal that the rules had been broken. Madeline Platt stood on the tarmac of a private airfield just outside of Farnborough, the wind whipping her coat around her legs. It was 3 a.m. The air smelled of aviation fuel and wet asphalt. Behind her, the engines of Gareth's Gulfstream were idling, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in her teeth. But they weren't boarding yet. They were waiting. Gareth stood 10 feet away, his back to her, talking on a satellite phone. He had not slept in 2 days. The perfectly tailored suit was rumpled, his tie gone, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, calculating the drop. When he ended the call, he didn't turn to her immediately. He looked out at the darkness, where the runway lights faded into the black English countryside. "They are coming," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Who?" Madeline asked, though she already knew. "The others," Gareth replied, turning finally. "The consortium. Volkov was a problem, yes, but by releasing his files, I proved that I am no longer a safe repository for secrets. Every client, every rival, every politician whose dirty laundry is stored on my servers, they are all terrified. They think they are next." He walked over to her, his movements heavy. "You need to get on the plane, Madeline. Cale is the pilot. The flight plan is filed for Cape Town. From there, you go to the safe house in the Karoo. It is off the grid. You will be safe." Madeline crossed her arms, shivering slightly in the cold, but her gaze was steady. "And you?" "I have a meeting," he said, gesturing to the empty stretch of tarmac. "The chairman of the consortium is landing in 10 minutes. I have to convince him that the Volkov leak was an isolated incident. I have to trade the remaining master keys for my life. And if he doesn't accept the trade, then I don't leave this airfield." The brutality of the statement hung between them. Gareth was preparing to die. He was preparing to sell off the last of his power to buy her a head start. It was the noble, tragic gesture of a man who believed he was beyond redemption. But Madeline was no longer just a witness to his world. She was a participant, and she had spent the last 48 hours doing what she did best, spinning the narrative. "I'm not getting on the plane, Gareth." He closed his eyes, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Madeline, please, do not make this harder. I cannot negotiate with a gun to my head, and you are the gun. If they see you, they will use you." "They won't use me," she said, stepping closer, "because I'm the one holding the trigger." Gareth's eyes snapped open. "What are you talking about?" Madeline reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple USB drive. It was silver, unadorned, and looked innocuous. "While you were scrubbing the servers and paying off the security team, I made a copy," she said calmly. "Not just of Volkov, of everything. The leverage folder, the politicians, the bankers, the consortium." Gareth stared at the drive, his face draining of color. "Madeline, do you have any idea what you're holding? That is a death sentence." "No," she corrected him. "It's an insurance policy. You think you can trade the keys and they'll let you walk away? They won't. You're a liability now. Once you hand over the leverage, they will kill you to ensure your silence. That is how this works. You told me that yourself." She pressed the drive into his hand, then closed her own hand over his, forcing him to hold it. "You can't negotiate from a position of weakness, Gareth. You have to be the bigger wolf." The sound of an approaching jet cut through the night. A sleek, black Bombardier Global 7500 descended from the clouds, its landing lights piercing the gloom. It touched down with a screech of tires and taxied toward them, coming to a halt 50 yards away. The door opened and stairs unfolded. A group of men descended. In the center was a man Madeline recognized from the society pages, Lord Sterling, a pillar of the British establishment, a philanthropist, and, as the files on the drive confirmed, the head of a shadow banking ring that laundered cartel money through real estate. Sterling walked toward them, flanked by 4 armed guards. He looked like a grandfather, benign and soft, wrapped in a cashmere coat, but his eyes were reptilian. "Nicholas," Sterling called out, his voice smooth and cultured. "You look tired, my boy." Gareth stepped forward, shielding Madeline with his body. He slipped the USB drive into his pocket. "Sterling, I didn't think you'd come personally." "Matters of extinction require a personal touch," Sterling said, stopping a respectful distance away. "You broke the covenant, Gareth. We trusted you with our sins because we believed you were a man of business. The Volkov leak proved you are a man of sentiment." "Volkov attacked my infrastructure," Gareth said coldly. "It was a defensive measure." "It was a breach of contract," Sterling countered, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And now the board is nervous. We cannot have a loose cannon holding the detonator. We require the master encryption keys, Gareth, and we require your resignation. Permanently." The guards shifted their weight. The threat was palpable. They weren't planning on letting Gareth leave. Gareth stood his ground. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted. But as his hand brushed the drive in his pocket, he glanced back at Madeline. She nodded, a microscopic movement that only he would see. "I can give you the keys," Gareth said. "I can wipe the servers. But that doesn't solve your problem, Sterling, because the data isn't just on the servers anymore." Sterling's smile faltered. "Excuse me." Madeline stepped out from behind Gareth. Her heels clicked on the tarmac as she moved to stand beside him. She linked her arm through his, presenting a united, unbreakable front. "Mr. Nicholas is trying to be polite, Lord Sterling," she said, her voice projecting clearly over the wind. "What he means to say is that the data has been decentralized." Sterling looked at her with disdain. "And who is this, the crisis manager? Miss Platt, I believe this does not concern you." "It concerns me deeply," Madeline replied. "Because 20 minutes ago, I configured a dead man's switch on a secure server in Iceland. It is linked to the biometrics of both myself and Mr. Nicholas." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "If we do not check in every 12 hours, the entire database, including your personal accounts in the Caymans and the video files from your private island, will be automatically emailed to every major news outlet in the world. The BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera. The files are already drafted. The headlines are written. I even included a very unflattering photo of you for the front page." Sterling's face went rigid. The benign grandfather mask slipped, revealing the monster underneath. "You are bluffing," he spat. "Am I?" Madeline asked, arching an eyebrow. "You saw what we did to Volkov. Do you really want to test if we'll do the same to you? We burned $1 billion deal just to stay alive. Imagine what will burn if you try to kill us." She stepped forward, releasing Gareth's arm and walking straight up to the most dangerous man in England. She stopped inches from him, smelling his expensive cologne and the fear radiating off him. "Here is the new deal, Sterling. We are retiring. Nicholas Holdings will liquidate its intelligence division. We will destroy the local copies of the files. We will step out of the game." "And the insurance file?" Sterling asked, his voice tight. "It stays active," Madeline said. "As long as we are alive and free, your secrets are safe. If we die in a car crash, a heart attack, a mugging gone wrong, the world sees everything. You aren't just letting us go, Lord Sterling. You are going to become our guardian angels. You are going to make sure that nothing happens to us, because our safety is now the only thing keeping you out of prison." Sterling stared at her. He looked past her to Gareth, who was watching Madeline with a mixture of shock and overwhelming pride. "You trained her well, Nicholas," Sterling muttered. "She trained herself," Gareth replied softly. Sterling looked back at the armed guards, then at the USB drive Gareth was holding up. He did the math. He realized, with the pragmatism of a survivor, that he had lost. "Very well," Sterling said, his voice clipped. "You exit the business. The files remain encrypted, and if I ever see either of you in London again—" "You won't," Madeline promised. "We prefer warmer climates." Sterling turned on his heel and walked back to his jet without another word. The guards followed, casting backward glances at the couple standing on the tarmac. The jet engines roared to life, and minutes later, the threat lifted off the ground, disappearing into the night sky. The silence that followed was profound. Gareth let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. He turned to Madeline, grabbing her shoulders, his grip tight. "A dead man's switch," he asked, "in Iceland." Madeline smiled, her legs finally starting to tremble as the adrenaline faded. "There is no switch," she admitted breathlessly, "and I don't know how to set up a server in Iceland." Gareth stared at her for a second, stunned. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, a sound she had never heard from him before. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "You lied to the chairman of the consortium," he said, kissing her face, her hair, her lips. "You bluffed the devil and won." "I learned from the best," she whispered against his mouth. He set her down but didn't let her go. He framed her face in his hands, looking at her with an intensity that burned. "You saved my life, Madeline, not just tonight. You saved me from becoming him." He gestured to the sky, where Sterling's plane had vanished. "We are out," he said, "truly out. I will dissolve the intelligence wing tomorrow. The blackmail, the leverage, it's over." "And the business?" she asked. "The legitimate business remains," he said. "Nicholas Holdings is still a multinational powerhouse, but it will be clean. We will build things, Madeline, real things, no more secrets." Madeline looked past him to the waiting Gulf Stream. The dawn was beginning to break on the horizon, a faint line of gray bleeding into gold. "New Zealand?" she asked. Gareth shook his head. "Too quiet," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "I was thinking New York, or perhaps Tokyo. Somewhere loud. Somewhere we can build an empire that doesn't need the dark to survive." He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. The leather of his watch against the silk of her wrist felt right. It felt permanent. "Are you ready, partner?" he asked. Madeline looked at the man who had once terrified her, the man who had bought her debts and stolen her freedom, only to give her a power she never knew she possessed. She wasn't the victim of a tragedy. She was the heroine of a conquest. She squeezed his hand. "I'm ready." They walked toward the plane together, leaving the cold, damp tarmac of England behind. As they ascended the stairs, Madeline didn't look back. She didn't need to see the ghosts of their past. She had the man, she had the money, and most importantly, she had the truth that in a world of wolves, she had found the one who would tear the throat out of anyone who tried to touch her. And that was better than a clean conscience. That was love. The jet door closed, sealing them in. The engines roared, pushing them down the runway and into the sky, banking toward the rising sun and a future that they would write themselves, on their own terms, with no one left to blackmail but each other.